If you remember, the last thing we closed at last week was the analysis whether or not the two tikkunim, or major processes of history, occur consecutively or concurrently. Now let me just repeat what that means again, and then we will go into a clear analysis of exactly what direction we're taking. We said that there are two fundamental processes, each one corresponding to a different Mashiach. First fundamental process, Mashiach ben Yosef, corresponds to the process called Tahara, which is the removal of all the Zoma that Adam Rishon brought into his sin. We said, in addition, there is another process which corresponds to the second Mashiach, Mashiach ben David, which refers to the concept of Kedusha. That is, bringing in more holiness or light into the world, which then enables the person, in this case Adam Rishon, to transform the material of his body and his world to create Olam Haba. That's called Zichor. This essentially are the prophecies. Now what we asked last week was, we understand that initially when Adam Rishon was first made, that he was involved in the process of Kedusha, to strengthen his neshama and give it the power to transform the world and his own body to create an Olam Haba. That's the process of Kedusha. That was supposed to lead to Zichor. Adam failed, and because he failed, he introduced a new process called Tahara, which is the removal of the evil or tumor which exists in the world itself, in the substance of the world itself. We said that the process of Tahara refers to three different things. One, to the neshama, two, to the guf or the body, and three, to the world. And we said that the Tahara must take place on all three of these entities in order to restore the original status of Adam Rishon. Now, those two processes exist. Once Adam Rishon sinned, he should have been the Mashiach, because he should have been the climax of that process. But had he succeeded, he would have been the Mashiach ben David, the equivalent to the Mashiach ben David. Because had he succeeded, and had he not done any sin, any chait, he would have been successful in Kedusha, he would have transformed the world in Zichor. He would have been anointed Mashiach. Because Mashiach, as we said, is fundamentally a process, and is secondarily an individual who represents the climax of that process. If you do not understand what I'm saying, you can get last week's tape that goes over the things in more detailed analysis. Once Adam Rishon sinned, he had to be involved now in the process of Tahara. He had to remove the stain which that sin caused, which is the essential residence of evil in the world and the destruction of the world itself towards death. We asked, how do the relationship of these two processes occur? If there are two processes, Tahara and Kedusha, how do they occur? Well, they can either occur consecutively or concurrently. The more logical of the two, it would appear, would be consecutively, meaning that first Adam Rishon, who was Tohor, he was pure, he had no Zoma, he had no evil impurities in him. He should have done the mitzvah, and he should have raised the world to a level of Kedusha. Okay. He failed to do that, so he brought the world a step down to what's called kilkul. He damaged the world. Instead of raising the world up from an inadequate state to an adequate state of shlemus, he brought the world down to a state of kilkul. That Tahara then was necessary. Once Adam brought the world into a level of kilkul or damage, obviously the world, in order to be restored back to its inadequate state, had to have a process of Tahara, which means that the process of Tahara should have started right away. It should have started right away. How? Adam Rishon, first of all, should have undergone tshuva or yisurin, number one, to remove the zoma of his neshama. Number two, he should have then died, and the body should have decomposed to remove the zoma on the guf. And number three, once that would have happened, he should have been again resurrected with the neshama placed in the guf, and this time Adam was restored as he was originally, without zoma. And then Adam should have been taking away temporarily so that the world can be reduced back to its chaotic state, and the world would have been destroyed and decomposed, and then it, after total decomposition, would again also be restored, and then Adam Rishon would be placed back on that newfound world, and bingo, we are back to where Adam was before the Chet. We've got a new neshama, we've got a new guf, and we've got a new world, and we're back to go. Again, Adam is given a new Nisoyim, he's given a new test, and we see what happens. So, that's the scenario where there's consecutive movement. Meaning, once Adam sinned and brought the world down to Kilkul, the process of Tahara should have started on all three of the elements, soul, Neshama, Guf, and world, and then once that would have been concluded, he would have risen to a level of Kedusha. If he would have done the mitzvah. Now, conceivably, Adam could have failed again, right? Because free will allows the possibility of failure, which means that if he would have failed again it would have been introduced Zolma, and again the Tahar would have taken place to reinstate Adam back. So technically speaking, this process can go on a great number of times until Adam Rishon finally succeeds. That's one way of looking at it, isn't it? That's an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? But that's not what's going on. Now there are reasons for that, which we will discuss shortly. One of the reasons. What actually happens is not a consecutive tikkun. It's not a process where Tahara takes place, it's completed, and then Kedusha takes place, and it's completed. That's not what happens. What happens is the following. Once Adam Rishon does the sin, you want a chair?
Your chair's over here.
There's chairs here. You want to... What we find is a different sequence of events. We find the fact that Adam was put into the gun and told what to do and what not to do. He failed. Hence, he damaged his world. He caused it to deteriorate. He was makafel the world. Now he's ready for Tahara. But what happens is that the Banishim does something entirely new. The Banishim does not give him a Tahara and then start all over again. This is not what happens. What happens is that the Tahara, which now must take place, is in conjunction with the Kedusha that will now take place. And for this, we will draw our second main diagram. Currently, we want to know, to some degree, how that happens. Now, we are going to look at this particular process. Now, you must remember something which I said last time, and I must stipulate it very carefully. There is a great difference if these processes, these two processes, or what's called the two tikkunim, or the two rectifications, occur together concurrently, or consecutively. There's a great deal of difference. If they occur consecutively, one after the other, it means that the first process is Tahara. That means that the first central rectification is the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef. When the Kedusha takes place, that then means that the second central concept of Mashiach takes place, or Mashiach ben David. But what it means is that both Mashiachs relate to each other in a consecutive way. They do not occur together, nor do the two individuals meet one another as such. It means that both of them have both processes and both individuals who climax these processes represent two people who occur at different points in time. If, however, both of these Mashiach processes occur concurrently, it means that both processes go together and the two Mashiachim, the individuals who climax them, are also represented together. But it means something even deeper. It means that both processes must occur together. It means that one Mashiach cannot survive without the other. That's something which it means in a much deeper fashion. We will investigate that. What we have seen is that the two processes occur concurrently. Now let's investigate this. When the Baruch Shem first created the world and he wanted to create a neshama who would be the recipient of everything that he wanted to give it, that neshama was Adam Rishon. It was Adam Rishon. At the beginning of time there was only one neshama, his. There was only one guf, his guf. And the Baruch Shem put him to the gun in order for him to earn his Olam Haba and remove the problem of Nam Nestufa. This was the only period of time that the Baruch Shem intended to have as far as the Tikkun process goes. In other words, the Baruch Shem created only one man to be the recipient of Olam Haba. And that one man had the entire power himself to create Olam Haba. It was the intention of the Baruch Shem that only Adam should create Olam Haba and only Adam should be in Olam Haba. That's all. What about all of us, you ask? All of us are included in the neshama of Adam Rishon because all souls were once part of that one vast, powerful neshama. Adam therefore had the right neshama, the right guf, to transform the entire existence. That's very important to understand. His neshama was a general neshama. His guf encompassed a general guf, and he had enough power stored in him alone to transform all of creation. That's very important to understand. He was an individual who was equal to the entire cosmos. We will understand this in more detail, but it's very important to realize that. He was identical to all reality, and he had the power to transform all of reality. He had the power to bring enough Kedusha to do that, and it was an enormous amount of Kedusha. Hence, we're dealing with an individual who represented a totality. He had complete neshama, which resided in a complete guf, which existed in a world, and he had the ability to bring down complete power to transform all reality. That was that one man. When he failed to do what he did was he brought in a new spiritual force, an evil force into the world. But that force was also so powerful, and because Adam Rishon was a total man, if I may call him that, he was a complete man in that sense, the damage that he did was also complete. Just like he could have completed the rectification, the tikkun of Kedusha, he also had the power to destroy the entire world, and he did it. He damaged his neshama, which was the entire neshama. He damaged his guf, which was all the guf that there was, and he damaged all of creation, which is all reality that was. He had enormous power. Once he did a sin, that power ended. It ended in a very strange way. What the Baruch Shem said was the following: that once you have failed, and Adam Rishon only had 1/2 a day to succeed. He was created on Friday, Erev Shabbos, and he had till Shabbos itself to complete the job. That's all. And Shabbos itself should have been the time of Olam Haba. What the Baruch Shem said, or will not say to Adam, was the following: that if Adam would fail to do, two things would happen. Number one, the time would be increased enormously, and number two, Adam would no longer be the same person. What do we mean? The Baruch Shem said that if Adam fails to do it, he will give the world 6,000 years to complete that job. That's it. From the time of Adam, from the time of his chait, the Baruch Shem says, I allow 6,000 years that job must be completed. Any which way. It cannot go beyond 6,000. That means that the world was created and only exists for 6,000 years. That's the fundamental belief why we say, the Jews say, that the world will not go beyond the year 6,000, and why the world right now is only 5,746 years. That's our count. Next year is 5,747. I'm not going to go into all the other difficulties with the scientific difficulties and so on and so forth. These can all be answered quite easily. What I'm simply saying is that the world of physical universe is no more than 5,746 years. And that the world will not go beyond the year 6,000. It self-destructs in 6,000. So 6,000 years was allotted on the scale to complete the job that Adam should have completed alone. But that's the first change. That whereas Adam had this section of time from the beginning to Erev Shabbos, the world was given another 6,000 years to do that job. That's the first important change. The time. The second important change was the individual. That no longer would this job be done by one man. One man no longer has the power to do this job. So the Buddha Shem therefore took away the kind of neshama and the kind of guf and the kind of world which can respond to one man. It all changed after the Chay. So what should have been done by one man now must be done by more than one. At least two and more. How many men? That depends on mankind. That depends on us. Let me just quickly go over the full amount of years describing what will happen, and then let's analyze it in more detail. Number one. We have said that Adam's job was to have Kedusha, bring Kedusha, but instead he was also involved with Tahara. Now, the Kedusha and the Tahara take place concurrently. That's why you'll notice the other line in the graph, which is the Kedusha line, and this is the Tahara line. There are two separate processes. Let's observe them as they occur over the 6,000 year period. What happens very basically is the following. Adam fails, the world has changed. The world has changed in terms of years and in terms of the nature of mankind. We will explain that in a minute. Now, the entire period from the sin of Adam, from the Chay of Adam, to the year 6,000 must complete the job. What job? The job of Tahara must be completed, and the job of Kedusha must be completed. Both jobs must finish by the year 6,000. 6,000, or the end of the 6,000, must be the beginning of Olam Haba, or the process of Zichor. We understand that? During this time, once the Chay is done, then Kedusha and Tahara take place concurrently, as we noticed. The lines go together. Now, there must come a point, however, when man begins to elevate himself and become closer and closer to what Adam was. Adam Rishon before the Chay, before the sin, was only one line, the line of Kedusha. There was no other line that represented his life. It was the line of Kedusha, and it was that line alone that existed. After the Chay, we have the line of Tahara. But what we find is an interesting thing. Adam should have rectified his entire world in a half a day. That power was given to him. Now that he fails to do it, it takes us much longer to do it. Because now that the neshama is no longer one person, but that neshama is split and fragmented into two or more, it means that the job takes longer, because the job has to be done by more people. What happens is the following. There comes a certain point in time when the Tahara of the neshama is completed. Through Yisurin and through Tshuva, and through the considered difficulty of all the people involved over the years, through all the sufferings and the tribulations, there comes a point when their neshamas are no longer involved in Chatoim, and that Tahara is completed. All the Zoma, which has to do with the neshama, is gone. That's this point here. When does that take place? unknown, and we'll explain in a minute. The first thing that's done in Tahara is the one of the Neshama. The Buddhism divided the Tahara process in 3 separate steps. Not only does the Kedusha and the Tahara take place simultaneously, but the Tahara itself takes place in 3 separate steps. First comes the Tahara of the Neshama. That's number 1. The Buddhism cleans up or rehabilitates the Neshama. After that's finished, then comes the Tahara of the Guf. Then the Buddhism cleans the Zoma of the Guf. And then finally, when that's finished, comes the Tahara of the world. So the Tahara itself takes place in 3 separate steps, not in one period. So we see therefore an interesting thing, that number 1, the Kedusha and the Tahara process are taking place at the same time, and have until the year 6000 to be finished. And number 2, that the Tahara process itself is being divided into 3 different steps, one after another in time. They're quite distant from each other in time. That means an interesting thing. That means that mankind will experience all these 3 things at different points in time. There will come a time when all of mankind will suddenly experience a Tahara of the Neshama. It's an incredible thing. That means that all the souls of the world will no longer have Dharma. What does that mean for us? That is the restoration of the Beit HaMikdash. It is the restoration of prophecy. It is the restoration of all people in the world, especially the Jews, to a very high level of spirituality. That period is called the redemption, or the beginning of the Yemot HaMashiach. What everybody's waiting for, the redemption, the Geula, the end of the exile, call it what you want. It all means the Tahara of the Neshama. That's what's waiting to happen. Like the prophet says, Umar Hashem Eslavavchem, and I will circumcise all the hearts of all men and remove the evil influence that exists in them to a very large extent. The Tahara of the Neshama constitutes the beginning of the Yemot HaMashiach. That's all it means. The Mashiach cannot appear. He cannot appear until the Tahara of the Neshama has been affected. When that's affected, from all men, he appears. That's what we're waiting for. Once that finishes, and he arrives, it goes on. And what happens, a number of years later, also unknown, all the people in the world are removing the last tumor in the guf. And at that point, what happens is that all mankind dies in one mass death at the same time. That is called the Tower of the Guf, or more specifically, it is called Chiyas HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. The Yemot HaMashiach is the beginning, or rather climaxes the Tahara of the Neshama. Chiyas HaMesim climaxes the Tahara of the Guf. Do we understand this? Once that is finished, a very interesting takes place. The world continues to go on. It goes on further. Until the year 6000. Now, that means that the Mashiach must appear before the year 6000. That's what it means. 6000 is the end of the world, period, as we know it. The Tahara of the Neshama and of the Guf must have taken place before, because Olam Haba, which is a place of transformation, cannot happen unless there is no more tumor or evil in the body and in the Neshama. That must be liquidated. Which means that the year 6000 cannot come here until the Tahara of the Neshama and the Guf appear. Because there is no Olam Haba unless there's a Tahara of the Neshama and Guf. There is none at all. So at the year 6000, it stops. Now let's take it piecemeal. There was only 254 years left to the existence of this world. It sounds strange, because this world has gone on for so many years. It's like it sounds incredible that there's only 256 years left to the existence of this world. The Mashiach must appear within those 256 years. Within those 256 years. What? 254. Sorry. There are only 254 years left. The Mashiach must appear within that period. Not only that, but in that period there will also be the resurrection of the dead. What happens at the end of that period? What happens in the year 6000? In the year 6000 is a great day of judgment called the Yom Hadin. That's what it says, and there will come a day when all men will be judged. Everything, every creature that ever lived will be judged. Well, basically men will be judged. All men, from the beginning to the end of time, to determine whether or not they will go into Olam Haba. It is called the great and awesome day because it is a very frightening day. It literally is a determination of your entire existence. If you qualify, and most of the Jews will, although Rav Moshe Chaim Osala says that there is a small minority of Jews who will not qualify. But if you qualify by virtue of the work that you've done and the belief that you've had, you will then experience a new thing. Suddenly, the Kedusha, which is in your neshama and has been acquired through all the years before, will suddenly transform your body. Right then and there. Zichoch, which is transformation, the creation of Olam Haba, begins in the year 6000. It begins, because as I said, the year 6000 is the beginning of Olam Haba. So therefore, at that point in time, after the great day of judgment, Yom Hadin, suddenly all those people who exist will mezach their guf, and the world is filled with angelic beings that were once human. Now you may say, this is astounding. How can this happen? We have said that by the year 6000, there's a Taurus on a Shama, the soul is purified, so now it can take that Kedusha and really do something with it. It's now capable of taking the Kedusha and performing the transformation. And then shortly thereafter, the Guf becomes purified, so the Guf now is capable of being transformed. And then the year 6000 occurs, and suddenly the Neshama then transforms the Guf. But wait, what about the world? When did that happen? The strange thing is that the world then achieves its Tahara after Zichoch. Now that's a strange concept. What does that mean? That means that the planet Earth as we know it will be filled with people who have been Mezach their Guf. It would be filled with angelic beings, neshamas, where you can look at another person and see the radiance of neshama right through his body. It would be composed of people who can literally become totally aware of every world of Ruchnius. And they will all be living on a physical planet. Well, how's that possible? That sounds like a state of half Olam Haba, half Olam Hazeh. Right? Well, that's the thing. What will happen is that at that point in time, as soon as the zichur or transformation takes place, suddenly all those people will be lifted off the physical universe and placed in a different time, a different place, a world which is called the Olam HaNeshamas, or the world of souls.
You go there with your book.
Yes. You go there in the world of souls with your book. Where is this Olam HaNeshamas? It is a world which is inhabited now only by Malachim. In other words, it is a totally spiritual world. Now you may say, how can you go into a totally spiritual world? Very simple. Your body is no longer physical. If you remember, we just said that the body has been transformed, so it is no longer physical. Because of that, you are literally like the Malachim. You are literally like an angelic being. And hence what happens is, your residence now becomes a world of pure spirit. What do you do in that world? That world is the beginning of Olam Haba in a certain way, in the sense that the Neshamas begin to do what they do in Olam Haba. The ultimate perception of the Bnei Shalom and the great joy and simcha begins at that point in time. But is that time Olam Haba? No. Because Olam Haba is the physical universe transformed, not some special spiritual world. Which means, at the year 6000, Zichuch takes place, and all neshamas, all people in their groups, go to that world, called the Olam HaNeshamas. However, at that point, at the beginning of that point, the world suddenly begins to become destroyed. And the entire physical universe that we know deteriorates completely back to chaos, to what it was before it was created. And it's, in a sense, the world dies. Just like the body dies, the world dies. How long does that go on? For 1,000 years. Till the year 7,000. Therefore, for the 1,000-year period between 6 to 7,000, all the people who are supposed to be in Olam Haba exist in a world of neshamas, which is the beginning of Olam Haba, and they await the actual creation of Olam Haba itself as a place. That must await the deterioration or the power of the world itself. In the year 7,000, the world is then itself resurrected. And when it is resurrected, it becomes a world where there is no Dharma. At that point, all the people come back to it, they come back down into that world. And as they enter that world, suddenly that world is itself transformed. You have to remember that after the year 7,000, the world essentially is in a world of what? Of toll, of chaos. It's simply in a world of what? Degeneration. But once it's restored, it simply lacks Dharma. But it has to go through the additional process of transformation. That is done in the year 7,000. So, Olam Haba, as we know it, doesn't really take place till the year 7,000. And at that point, all the Tahara has been finished. And therefore, all the Zichuch will be finished. The transformation of reality cannot begin in truth, in totality, until the Tahara, or the purification of reality, has finished. Until the removal of any stick of Dharma. And that takes place in this period of time. From the year 7,000, we deal with the world and people who have no Dharma, of course, and who have been totally transformed. But is that the real beginning of Olam Haba? Yes. Because it's a world without Dharma, and it is a world of Zichuch, of transformation. But the true nature of Olam Haba doesn't start in its full intensity until the beginning of the 10,000th year. So the world has to go through another 2,000 years of progressive Zichuch until it hits its climax, and that's the beginning of Olam Haba. And how long does that last? No time. There is no end. What? We understand that. So therefore we see an interesting thing, that both Kedusha and Tahara always take place progressively. We see that the Tahara process, or the removal of Dharma, once it has been instituted because of the Chet of Adam, is going on progressively. It doesn't happen in one shot. First, the Tahara of the Neshama, that starts Yimot Mashiach. The Tahara of the Guf, that's Kriyas HaMesim. And then at the year 6,000 starts the Tahara of the world, which happens simultaneously with the Zichuch, or the transformation of the Neshama and the Guf. But the world itself must go on for another 1,000 years for Tahara, while the person is already in a transformed state. In other words, the person, the Neshama and the Guf together, will have already started his transformation before the entire universe. He will have started the process of Zichuch 1,000 years earlier than the universe itself. I say that the group will no longer exist. What does that mean, really? Besides the fact that the substance of the group will no longer exist, you will no longer know any physical drive. There is nothing physical that would exist. Right now, when you're alive, you can feel your body, can't you? How? Not only can you perceive it, you feel it. You feel its demands on you constantly. You feel the need to breathe, the need to eat. You feel the need to involve yourself constantly with all kinds of things. Right? But in the time of the year 6,000, you will no longer feel that. The guf will be on you like your skin. It just simply, you will wear it. Like you wear your skin, and that's it. It will have no presence other than its minimal existence. It will have no desire, no inclination of its own. What will you feel? You will only feel the desires of the neshama. That's it. The neshama itself has its own desires. You see, can we feel some desires of the neshama? Yes, to some degree, very minimally. The desire for truth, the desire for these things, the desire for spirituality, these are desires of the neshama. Except that while we're in the guf, those desires are small. Once that guf no longer has any kind of pressure or inclination, the desire of the neshama is expanded thousands of times. So suddenly you are no longer concerned with anything that has to do with physical. The only thing you will want is that which has to do with spiritual. And that's exactly what you will be. Now, you've got to realize that, and this is a very important thing, because it's one of the most powerful things that the Yetzer Hara says. The Yetzer Hara tells you that the way you are now is the way you will always be. Since you have a guf now, and the way you feel your guf, this is what will always exist. You will always be this way. So naturally, you resign yourself that if this is the way I'm going to always be, I might as well succumb to all the things that the guf wants. And that is a catastrophic error. Because when you realize it or not, and we've explained this a number of times, that the guf undergoes a radical transformation in the sense that it's no longer felt. Now you can't imagine that. But then again, you couldn't even imagine what would happen several thousand years ago when the people were involved in completely different things. We have no idea what other Rishon was like before the Chay, or what people were like several thousand years ago who were involved in prophecy and tissue and magic and all these things. We have no idea of these things. These things don't all exist. We have no idea what kind of people they were. It's totally different to us now. And it's the same thing in the future. Just like we have changed from the time of other Rishon from now, we will change up in the future. So we will no longer be the same kind of individuals at all. That's why the dominance that your guf plays now is a minimal dominance. If you allow the guf to dominate you, then that guf which dominates you will prevent the neshama from expanding. And you will be destined always to have a lack of power in that neshama. But if you realize that the way you feel now is only temporary, it's going to change and it's going to end. Realize that. Then it's not going to always be this way. Shlomo Melech once was looking around for what are the most wisest things, the words that contain the greatest wisdom. And there's a whole story about that. And finally, what he figured out that the three words which contain the greatest wisdom is Gam Ze Yavor. This too shall pass. Why is that? Because the greatest wisdom that you can know as people is to know that you are not permanent, that your situation is not permanent, that your mind is not permanent, and that you change from year to year. Just like when you were children, and when you were 1-year-old and 2-year-old, right? You were all 1 or 2 years old. What were you like? Are you the same then that you are now? Of course not. Were you as 2-year-old preoccupied with the same thing as you are now? Of course not. None of us thinks about toilet training anymore. At least none of us should. But that's it. So you say, well, how could I have been a being that's involved in such concerns? Where was I? You see. Because that essentially was the realm of your consciousness. It's been altered. Just like it's been altered from now to then, it will be altered again in another 10 years. You will not be the same person in the next 10 years. No, you will be the same person in the next 25 years. You change as a person from year to year, from decade to decade. And you change as a being from era to era. You will not be the same after Tchias HaMesim. And you will surely not be the same after Olam Haba. So these three words, Gam Ze Yavor, this too will change, are the most critical words, because if you realize that everything is temporary, you will not invest your entire being and commit yourself to what you are now. You will commit yourself and invest yourself to what you will be, ultimately, because that's where it counts. Who is the permanent you? The permanent you is in the year 6,000. That's the permanent you. It's a year, it's a time, it's a you where there's neshama, which has acquired enough power to undergo the transformation of Olam Haba. And if you don't prepare for that time, if you're not concerned with that time, you will have nothing. Because you will not have acquired the power which is necessary to create your own Olam Haba. And then you will not be there. Because he who fails to create his Olam Haba will not experience Olam Haba. Gamze Yavor. This too will pass. And Shlomo Melech in all his wisdom found these three words to be the most powerful thing. Because when your mind is fixed on these three words, you then have a chance to really acquire that which is permanent.
For coming here tonight is an Neshama feeling.
Please don't. You have to read this. I should hope so. Let's go on. We understand this now. I don't want you to be confused. Tahara, Kedusha, two separate processes. Okay? Tahara takes place in three steps. I have described the three steps, and I have told you the name that the Torah gives to these three steps. Actually, the name of this is Yom HaDin. That's Chet. Now, let's look at the Kedusha line, and let's see what happens here. What's happening? And this is very subtle. Very subtle. What's happening here? Adam Rishon was supposed to do what? He was supposed to what was Adam Rishon supposed to do? Adam Rishon was supposed to bring down a Kedusha to transform the world. Okay, he therefore was supposed to bring down a Kedusha. How much Kedusha? Okay, let's give it a quantity. Let's say Adam Rishon was supposed to bring down 100 pounds of Kedusha. Now Kedusha is not meant in pounds. So for the sake of analogy, let's say it was 100 pounds of Kedusha. What is the value of 100 pounds of Kedusha? Okay. Adam Rishon had a world, right? That world was a reality. Let's look at the situation of Adam Rishon before the Chet. Adam Rishon before the Chet, right, could have brought down 100 pounds of Kedusha. Now, before the Chet, Adam had a very powerful neshama. Let's call that total neshama. TN. That's called total neshama. Okay? Now, that total neshama, which has a power to transform our reality, was put into a guf, into a body. That body is called total body, or TB. Okay? He was supposed to bring down a Kedusha of 100 pounds, right? And that's called total Kedusha, or TK. And he was supposed to transform all of reality, called TR. Okay? We understand this? Okay? Total neshama was put in the total body. And total man was created. Total man was to bring down total Kedusha, 100 pounds, and transform total reality. He was given the space of a hashday to do it. In those circumstances. He failed. Chet entered the world. Dom entered the world. The world is now concerned with plots of Tahara. But what about the plots of Kedusha? How was the plots of Kedusha altered, right? Okay. The plots of Kedusha was altered in a different way. It's altered by what we always have called up till now the Guf Neshama ratio, or the GN ratio. Now, there are some people who know what Guf Neshama ratio is, and some people who are not. And for the sake of the people who are not, we will have to conduct a very quick review of what Guf Neshama ratio is. What's that? No, it's going to be very quick. Guf Neshama ratio simply means the following. A Neshama is put into a Guf. What does that mean? What I have said is that a Neshama and a Guf are two separate entities. Each one has its own drive and its own direction. The Guf has certain drives. It has physical drives. The Neshama has its own drive. Initially, the Guf and the Neshama exist as two separate beings. They are now merged together. What results? A combination of the two. the weight? If there's a combination of the two, which drive is felt? The answer, both drives are felt. And it's up to the person to choose between these two drives. But, since there are two drives being felt at the same time, we enter the mathematical concept of a ratio. Because what is a ratio? A ratio is nothing more than the balance, or the numerical equivalent of two different quantities in contrast to each other. So that's a ratio. Okay, we have finished the concept of Guf Neshama ratio. Now, what does Guf Neshama ratio have to do with Kedusha? Well, Adam Rishon was created in the beginning. He was a man with what? With total body, or let's call that total Guf. TG, I like that Guf better. Total Guf and total Neshama. Okay, let's put it together. Total Neshama plus total Guf equals total man. Okay? Tn plus Tg equals Tm. Do we understand that? What was the Guf Neshama ratio of Adam Rishon? Since he was the first man, and he had the entire total Neshama, his Neshama was enormous. His Guf was also powerful. But since he had the first Neshama in its totality, the Guf Neshama ratio was extremely skewed. So that the power of the Neshama was vastly superior to the power of the Guf. In terms of the nature of reality. Physical reality essentially conformed itself to the Neshama mostly and very minutely to the Guf. So, the Guf Neshama ratio was like 99 to 1. 99 being the Neshama and 1 being the Guf. That means that Adam Rishon, while he was alive, before the Chet, was able to be a prophet. He sensed a great deal of the spiritual world while he was in his body. Why? Because it was the Neshama that was the power, not the Guf. The Guf was a very small power relative to the Neshama, and it can only mask a certain amount of the Ruchnius, of the spirituality. It was enough, however, to create a situation of free will. He failed to do what he's supposed to do. What did the Buddhism do? The Buddhism said the following: no longer will one man do what you should have done. Instead, I will give that task to two people. Now, that's not exactly what happens, but let's say theoretically that's what happens. So what happens is that no longer is there an existence of what? Of total Neshama in total Guf. What you have now is half man, half man. What does that mean? Bear with me. Let's look at the next situation. If Adam Rishon constituted a complete situation, what's the next stage? The next stage, there are two people to do what one person should have done. That means that each person now has half the Neshama that Adam has. It also means that they have half the Guf. When I mean half the Guf, I don't mean one guy has the arms and the other guy has the legs. What I mean is they have half the Guf, means each one has half of the vessel which is supposed to be transformed to Olam Haba in some way. Each one has half of the element of Guf or body which constitutes a barrier to Olam Haba. Each one has half of an opaque quality. So what you have now is the following. You have 1/2 man plus 1/2 man, right? Equals what? Equals complete man. Each one now has 1/2 of the body, right? Of the Guf. Plus 1/2 the Guf, right? Equals what? Total Guf.
One half the Neshama.
But please, let me finish. What does that mean? That means that each person now is 1/2 of Adam. So the two of these people have got to do it together. They both have to do together what Adam should have done alone. But since each one is now necessary, each one now has 1/2 the power. Each one has 1/2 the Neshama and 1/2 of the Guf power of Adam. Each one now has the ability to transform only 1/2 of reality. And each one can only bring down how much Kedusha? 1/2, 50 pounds. That's it. You see what I'm saying? It's very simple. If one man was given a certain job, and that man fails, the Buddhism decided to give it to two men. So everything is split in half. Do we understand this? Very simple. I don't see what's so difficult to understand about this.
Who's the other man?
I'm not concerned with that. I don't want to identify individuals. I want you to understand the concept here. Listen to the concept. Forget about the names. Do we understand this? It's very simple. There is one job. That job needs an neshama to transform a guf to be transformed, a world to be transformed, and a certain kedusha power to do the transformation. In other regions, before the sin, it all exists in one man, one body, one kedusha, one world. After, it now is in two men. Each man now has half the neshama, and therefore can only bring down half the power. Each one has only one half the opaque aspect of the world, and each one now has control over one half the reality. Do we understand this now? Very simple. Why is it done like that? Why? Well, first of all, if you notice, total man is very different than one half man. How? In the guf neshama ratio. Why? Because now that each one has only one half the neshama, you see, even though the guf comes down, but the fact is that with one half the neshama, the world becomes darker, much darker. So what you find is that the world of the physical becomes more dominant. And the ability to feel spirituality recedes. Smaller neshama, smaller eyes. That's all. So therefore, what becomes more vast is the physicality of the world. Darkness comes in the world. So the GN ratio is altered because the neshama becomes smaller. Do we understand this? Now, why is this done? Well, first of all, let's understand something. By this happening, what happens to Olam Haba? How is Olam Haba affected? How? Well, if you had a certain person that had the power to transform all of physical reality and make all of Olam Haba, if you have now two people, it means that each one now only has access to one half of Olam Haba. So by reducing the neshama in half, you have the Olam Haba for each one. That's really what it is. By making Olam Haba available to more people, you made less of it available to each one. Do we understand this? That's simply what happens. Not only that, there's something else. Because of the fact that the guf neshama ratio is altered, you see, and each one is now only half neshama in half of a guf, the bechira, in a sense, is altered. Because what it is the ability to freely choose is altered as well. Adam Rishon before the sin had 100% free will. 100%. None of us knows what that means. You have no idea what 100% free will is. That means that you will never have a thought. To have 100% free will means that you are a person and you never experience a thought in your head that tells you to do something beyond your control. That's what 100% freedom means. It means you never experience an irrational idea. You never experience a thought in your head which is compulsive or in some way irrational or doesn't make sense. It doesn't exist. That's 100% bechira, 100% free will, 100% logical mind. Once man was reduced in half, that's what changed. Because as the guf became more dominant, then what happens was the ability to understand things rationally receded. And what you find is that each person now has less of bechira or less free will than the one before. So therefore, what happened was basically is that after Adam Rishon sinned, man was reduced in terms of his bechira level. He no longer had the free will, which is what? Which is dominant in his mind. Only now his free will has been diminished. Number one, his kedusha, or the power of kedusha that he's able to experience, has been diminished. And because of this, the amount of olam haba that he gets has been diminished. That means that the actual effort of kedusha, the mitzvahs that you do, are literally affected. Adam Rishon was given one mitzvah. After he failed, it was converted into 7 mitzvahs. More mitzvahs. But don't think that those 7 mitzvahs were 7 times thrown into one. Those 7 in totality was less than the one that Adam Rishon had. which means that the entire effort of creating an Olam Haba was divided. That means that everyone now has less of a chelik, less of a share in Olam Haba. Why is that? Because that's the loss of Adam Rishon. You see, that's the catch. Even though the Baruch Shem says to us, I want to rehabilitate you even if you sin, right? And I want to institute a process of tahara, but there is something that I will take away as well. You know, it's not this kind of thing. You can't do this kind of thing and expect to go back to zero again, just like you were before. It doesn't work. You don't go back to zero. You can't start out at a certain point, you see, and fumble the ball and expect to get back exactly to the same line where you started. You must lose something in the process. Tahara simply means that the Baruch Shem will allow you to go back to some point in the line. Without Tahara, you're finished. The game is over. If the Baruch Shem didn't institute the process of Tahara, of removing the effects of the sin, there would be no world, there would be no existence, because all the world would have been taken out of existence. The fact that Tahara is instituted means that the world is allowed to continue and survive. But that does not mean that the world will go back to what it was before. What does that mean, the world doesn't go back to what it was before? Is Olam Haba changed? Is it different? No. If there was 100 pounds of Olam Haba in the time of Adam Rishon before the Chet, there's 100 pounds of Olam Haba in the time after the Chet. This is another critical principle. The structure of Olam Haba is constant. When the Baruch Shem said that I will create an Olam Haba, he said that I will never change that structure. Olam Haba will exist exactly like I have designed it, with the exact amount of quantity and quality which I've given it. It will not be altered. Do we see that? What the Baruch Shem did was, against Olam Haba on one side, he created a man called Adam, who was an exact counterpart to Olam Haba. There's 100 pounds of Olam Haba. Therefore, Adam Rishon, one man, had the capacity to transform these 100 pounds. Had he done that, he would have had all that 100 pounds. But once Adam failed, Olam Haba remains, the 100 pounds remains. But what changes is the man. No longer is one man now accessible to transform Olam Haba. No longer does one man acquire all of Olam Haba. Rather, it is mankind which must acquire Olam Haba. Do we understand this? Mankind. No matter how many divisions happen, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 1,000, 20,000, 500 million, 4 billion. I don't care. It's nothing more than a repetition of the formula I just played. Do we understand? So therefore, mankind now as a totality is Adam in the beginning. But now with Adam, one person could have acquired all of Olam Haba because he had that strength. He was total man, with total neshama, total guf, total body. You see, and the gene ratio was extremely powerful, where the neshama was extremely powerful. It's no longer that. Everything was halved, and fractions, and fractions, and fractions. Every time one generation fails to do the job, we go on to the next generation. You see, and the next generation. And what we see, we constantly have a fragmentation of mankind itself, so that each generation of men have smaller neshamas, tinier neshamas, smaller gufs in that sense, a greater inability to access ruchnius, smaller pieces or portions of Olam Haba. Everything gets smaller, everything diminishes. Do we see how it works? Why? Because that is a fundamental consequence of sin. The most powerful consequence of sin is not the fact that we will ultimately be annihilated, because the Baruch Shem has removed that. When the Baruch Shem says, I will allow Tahara to take place, I will split the prophet Mashiach into a prophet called Mashiach from Yosef as well as Mashiach from David. He simply removed the annihilation of the world. But what we did lose was the ability of what we were. It is man who changes from generation to generation. Man becomes smaller and smaller. You become less and less of a person. Tinier and tinier. Do we understand this? It's a very strange thing, you see. This is Adam Rishon. Right? First man equals Olam Haba. But now Olam Haba cannot be split. Structurally it is constant. So if Olam Haba was 100 pounds then, and he had 100 pounds of Kedusha to transform it, that's what will remain. What changes is the nature of Adam Rishon, so that he begins to be split into 1/2, 1/4, 1/n. And what happens is that the Chalakim of Olam Haba begins to be changed. The 100 pounds remain constant. But after a while, Olam Haba becomes 100/2. And then finally 100/n. So, the exact equation is the following. Adam Rishon represents a specific power. Okay? That's a certain Kedusha. That Kedusha essentially is a fraction or a ratio over n. N means how many people? How total is man? Olam Haba also has a certain amount of what? Of Kedusha. Also over n. The two equations are exact. As n gets greater here, more and more people show up, n gets smaller here. Thus they are inversely proportional. As n becomes bigger, more people, n here, which means each portion becomes smaller. Do we understand that? Very basic. The more people around, the less we share. The more we have to share, the less it is for each one of us. Now that is only possible because man himself becomes smaller and smaller. You understand? Literally, there is a real transformation of the human mind and the human spirit from one generation to another. That's what allows all of us now to share one Olam Haba. Well, that's why I said before, although I said it sounded humorous, when I said that Adam Rishon was a total man, you've got to understand what Adam Rishon was. Adam Rishon was a total man because he had the capacity to what? To enjoy all of Olam Haba. It was his property. He owned it. He had the power to create it. Once he failed, God guaranteed us that we will not be annihilated. But with the bunch of removed, he took away what man was. He said that no longer will one man create it. Many men will create it. And the number of men who will create it depends on how far we have to go over the line of 6,000 years to do it. That's what the 6,000 year line represents. The Buddhism said that in 6,000 years, you see, mankind must bring down the 100 pounds of Kedusha, no matter how many people there are. If there are 100 people, then 100 must be brought down. Each one must be now 1 pound. You see, but the Buddhism says that I will allow 6,000 years. In 6,000 years, all the Kedusha that is necessary to transform all of Olam Haba must exist in humanity as a whole. This is called a very special term in Hashkafa. It is a very important buzzword. And it is a buzzword which few people really understand. What is that called? If this entire thing is called a tikkun, that is called the tikkun hakloli. The general tikkun, or the overall tikkun. But Moshe Chaim Tzadok many times mentions the word tikkun hakloli, but it's very hard to know what he's saying. What tikkun hakloli really means is simply this equation that I've drawn for you. What it means is that Olam Haba is constant in its structure. What varies is man and the portions of Olam Haba. But the totality of Olam Haba is always constant. Therefore, what happens is the following. Every time the neshamas are halved and the goods are halved, or the fraction, and the world is halved, it doesn't matter. In their totality, as a total, they must always equal the original sum. Do you understand? It's the sum that remains constant. It is the sum that remains constant. How we get to that sum is up to us. The tikkun hakloli means the total sum. It refers to that original sum. But in the time of Adam Rishon before the Chait, in the beginning, one man could have achieved the tikkun hakloli. One man. Now, all of mankind must do it. All of man must do what he did before, or could have done. But what we still must do is the tikkun hakloli. That's what we're after. we're after the rectification and the completion of Olam Haba as it was originally created. Except that now we all have to do it as a group, not as individuals, not as one person. We have to do it together. That's why it says, Kol Yisrael Areim Zelo Zeh. Now you understand a very important thing. Why does it say that every Jew is responsible for the next Jew? Why does it say that? What do I care? If I have my Torah and I have my mitzvahs, then I'll do my Torah and mitzvahs. What do I care what you do? You see? The answer is because I can't get my Olam Haba in a sense unless you get your Olam Haba. Because I can only construct 1/n of Olam Haba. You see what I'm saying? No one man can do it. No one man can isolate himself and construct the Tikkun HaKlali. Olam Haba is a joint effort. And therefore, since Olam Haba rests on the Jews as its basic construction, and I'll get into that later on, therefore all Jews are connected to each other. We are all builders of the one building called Olam Haba. That's why we are all responsible for each other. That's why we have to look out for each other and make sure that all of us are from. Do we understand this? That's why it's not enough simply to go on your own way alone. Because not only are you destroying, not giving another person the opportunity, but in a certain sense you are diminishing or you're making it impossible for your own Olam Haba. You see, we will see later on in the next series that this entire thing that I have painted for you, this entire picture, is the essence of the Exodus of Egypt and what happened. It is the essential explanation of what happened in the entire first Chumash. But that's for a later time. What you must understand now is exactly the principles that I have stated. They're really very simple, but they're very basic. We see therefore that the Chet of Adam Rishon introduced a new process called Tahara. You see. But at the same time, it disfigured or changed the old process called Kedusha. You see. In other words, he didn't get away with it, Adam. He became smaller as a result. His Olam Haba was smaller as a result. Everything changed. What man was changed, multiplied and multiplied. As you multiply mankind, each person becomes smaller and smaller. Each one has access to smaller and smaller portions of Olam Haba. You understand this? Okay, 1 second now, we'll finish off. You all understand what I said to now? So, let's now look. Now that we understand the process of Tahara, how it takes place over 6,000 years, and we understand now essentially what's going on in the world of Kedusha, the process of Kedusha, let's analyze it more specifically. The Tikkun HaKlali is what ultimately has to be established. Who determines the Tikkun HaKlali? Depends on what man is available. In the beginning of time, it was Adam. He only had one process. That process was called Kedusha. In this point, from 0 to here, there was no Tahara because there was never any sins as such, at least theoretically. In potential, there was a process. With naturality, there was no dynamic as such of Tahara because there was no sin. So the only process which existed for Adam Rishon from the time he was made until the time he sinned was the process of Kedusha. That's called Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben David was the only messianic process. And the only kind of Mashiach that would have existed had Adam not sinned. Now, Adam sins. Suddenly something happens. Two things happen. Tahara begins, number one, and number two, Kedusha is completely disfigured. So that Adam is split. For the sake of brevity, let's say it's split into two. Now we go on. Okay. That means that both of these people now must do what he did. They therefore have a different set of mitzvahs. They have different trials. It's a completely different situation. Everything is altered. Depending on what they do, we see. They can either do one of the things, either they can succeed, and if they succeed, they again what? Restore the world back to the situation, or they can fail, which means that we have to go on. And on and on and on as long as mankind fails. The key thing, the key objective of Kedusha is to what? Is to get enough power of Kedusha to begin the process of Zichor. That's what it is. In the end, the neshama of all men together, all Jews together, is the total of Adam. In the end, the total of all our bodies together is the one body of Adam Rishon. So therefore, in the end of time, when we're experiencing the Tower of the Neshama, the Tower of the Neshama means that the Tower collectively of Adam Rishon. The Tower of the Guf means that the Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the original Guf of Adam Rishon, now in its fragmented form. The Zichuch, the ultimate Zichuch of both the Neshama and Guf, is really the Tikkun HaKloli. It's a Tikkun of what Adam would have happened, should have happened at that point in time. Now if we notice, as we go on time, the Baruch Shem says, I give 6,000 years to finish Torah and to finish Kedusha. In 6,000 years, mankind must have completely swept away all the problems, and in addition, they must also have brought down enough power to transform the world. By the time the Tower of the Neshama is reached, by the time we get over here, you see, we already begin to have enough Kedusha. You see, by the time the world reaches a state, now here's an important concept that you see from here. By the time the world reaches the point of Tchias HaMesim, or the resurrection of the dead, you see, what happens? Then all the souls are pure, and they go back into their body, and that's also pure. Which means that all the people will be like Adam Rishon was before he sinned. Except that they will be much greater. And this is a very important principle. The important principle is the following. Is that we now, as we approach the days of Mashiach, are much greater than Adam was, even before the sin. Mankind as a totality, all of us together, all Jews together now, when we experience the Moshe Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim, will be greater than what Adam was before he sinned. Much greater. Why? Who can figure that out? Why? Why is it that once mankind gets to the state of Tchias HaMesim, when we are no longer experiencing death, why is it that we will be more than what Adam was before the sin? We'll be much greater. Okay, is the first then good? Yes, exactly. Because Adam Rishon before the Chet never brought down any Kedusha. Did you say that? Adam Rishon before the sin never brought down any Kedusha. You see, before the sin he didn't have the Kedusha yet that was necessary to transform, because he never did that one mitzvah. Hence he spoiled the entire situation. But we are not what Adam was before the sin, because we have the Tumah. But even though, since the Kedusha is taking place concurrently, we at least have the Kedusha that he doesn't have. So by the time we remove all that Tumah, we will be bigger than he was. Because not only will we be in a state where there is no more Zomah, we will also have almost all the Kedusha necessary to build Olam Haba, which is what Adam did not have. Do we understand? That's why the Jews in the time of the Mashiach will be greater than Adam Rishon before the Chet. Much greater. In that sense, as a totality. The Tikkun HaKloli. Remember. Because by the time we get, you see, to the resurrection of the dead, we will have already established the world in a certain Tahara, and have acquired most of the Kedusha which is necessary. You see. Now, why is it that these periods take place to last Kedusha, even after the Moshe Mashiach? Because obviously, there's a little bit Kedusha still left. And there's a little bit left. In other words, all the last drops of Kedusha, if I may say, use the term, do not finally come down until the year 6000. At that point in time, mankind, the Jews as such, suddenly crystallized, the neshamas of the Jews crystallized as a group. In terms of the Neshama Adam, all the bodies crystallized as a guf in terms of the original body of Adam Rishon. The world coalesces to be the world of that, and suddenly the Zichuch takes place of that, and that's the Tikkun HaKloli. It's like we reenact as humanity what Adam should have reenacted or had as a single person. That's essentially what it is. Now, this explains, and this is the ultimate principles of all human history. at least in its basic general notion. There are two processes, Kedusha and Tahara. Tahara takes place over three separate steps. You see, it takes a long time to get Tahara to the Neshama. Till all the Neshamas of all Jews and all these people are cleaned up and cleared up. That's why we have 2,000 years of exile. Because when the Baruch saw that the Jews did not clean it up 2,000 years ago, he said, I got to do one more mass mop-up, one more cleansing. You see, one intense cleansing to remove completely the Zomar. And that was the next 2,000 years of darkness and exile. But that's the final Tahara process. And at the end of that, the Baruch saw that, wait a minute, I want to do it faster. So the Baruch says, I must do one more intense Tahara process to begin really the Gula. And what was that? The Holocaust. The last one of the most powerful Tahara process necessary to start the Gula in force as such. You see. But these are all processes of Tahara taking place. So we see that the Tahara process takes place in three steps. Tahara to Neshama, Tahara to Guf, Yitchias HaMesim, resurrected dead, and then the Tahara of the Bria itself on the entire world. What about the Tahara with the Tikkun of what? Of Kedusha? That also takes place over 6,000 years concurrently with the Tahara process. Except it is also altered because of the sin of Adam Rishon. It is altered by the Guf Neshama ratio. It is altered because mankind becomes more and more what? Multiple. As such, the neshamas become smaller, the bodies become smaller, the koiches or the powers become smaller, everything diminishes. The portions of Olam Haba become smaller, so that Olam Haba begins to fractionate into smaller and smaller pieces. But all of human history is explained in this essentially movement, in both the Tahara and the Kedusha. If we would understand how the Kedusha and Tahara takes place, in its clear, critical details, we can explain all of human history. These are the keys. When the Tahara, the main Tahara finishes with the Neshama, then that climaxes it in a person. That person is Mashiach ben Yosef. Hence he appears at the beginning of the Yemot Mashiach. And then finally when the Tahara to Neshama is over, starts the next period, the Kedusha, well it started before, but the Kedusha begins to wrap up, and as it becomes closer and closer, where it's the main thing, the Mashiach ben David appears. This is essentially how it proceeds. Just like the Kedusha becomes greater and greater, also, since more and more Kedusha exists, and by the time the Yemot Mashiach starts, there's much less of a job, because most of the Kedusha that's necessary for Olam Haba is already here. Hence, man doesn't need all that it doesn't need all that evil anymore. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara is diminished. And in the time of the Yemot Mashiach, the Yetzer Hara that everyone experiences will become much smaller. Until finally, at the year 6,000, it's totally removed. This is the basic scenario and the essential principles that run history itself, and which everything is really based.